Every day, inside the guarded chambers of Henry VIII, there was a moment no one else in England was allowed to witness. No generals, no queens, no advisors, just one man and the king. In that room, the power, the ceremony, the image of royalty all disappeared. The crown meant nothing there, because in that moment, the most powerful man in the country became something else entirely: human. And standing beside him, closer than anyone else could ever be, was a man whose job sounds almost impossible to believe. He was trusted with the king's most private routine. He saw what no one else saw. He heard what no one else heard. And in return, he gained something far more valuable than wealth or titles. He gained access. The kind of access that could shape decisions, influence power, and quietly change the course of history. So why would noblemen compete for a role like this? Why would they risk everything just to stand in that room? And how did this strange position become one of the most powerful in all of England? To understand this, you have to step into the world of Tudor England, where everything revolved around the king. Henry VIII was not just a ruler. He was the center of the entire political universe. His health, his mood, even his smallest decisions could affect the fate of thousands. People lived and died based on his favor. And yet, for all his power, Henry was deeply isolated. Every conversation he had was watched. Every interaction carried an agenda. Every person around him wanted something. In a world like that, trust was rare, and privacy was almost non-existent. The king was never truly alone, except for a few brief moments each day. And those moments were controlled by a single individual, known as the Groom of the Stool. The title itself came from the closed stool, a wooden commode used before modern plumbing. But the role was never as simple as the name suggests. From the very beginning, it was given to men of status, not servants. Men who understood court politics, who could navigate power, and who could be trusted to remain silent, because silence was everything. When the king spoke freely, without guards or advisors, those words could never leave the room, unless the groom chose to carry them outside. And that is where the true power of the position began to reveal itself. Each morning followed a strict ritual. The king would wake, and a carefully selected group of attendants would begin the process of preparing him for the day. But before any of that, before the court assembled, before the public face of power returned, there was a quieter moment, a more private moment. The Groom of the Stool was there for all of it. He prepared the room. He assisted the king. He remained present while the rest of the world waited outside. And in those minutes, something unusual happened. The king spoke, not as a ruler, but as a man. He complained, he questioned, he reflected, and the groom listened. Think about what that meant. In a court where access to the king was everything, this man did not need permission to be present. He was already there. He did not need to compete for attention. He had it by default. While others waited hours, days, even weeks for an audience, the groom began every morning alone with the most powerful man in England. And that kind of access changes everything. Because influence does not always come from grand speeches or public debates. Sometimes it comes from quiet moments, from a suggestion made at the right time, from a name mentioned when no one else is around. Men quickly began to understand what this role truly offered. It was not about the task. It was about proximity. And proximity in a court like Henry's was power. Figures like Sir William Compton rose to prominence through this position, becoming one of the king's most trusted companions. He was not just an attendant. He was a confidant, a gatekeeper, someone who could influence, who gained access to the king, and who remained outside. And that made him incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. But power in Henry's court was never stable. It shifted constantly, often without warning. And the same proximity that could elevate a man could also destroy him. Henry Norris learned this the hard way. As Groom of the Stool, he stood at the center of royal life. He had the king's trust, his attention, his confidence. But when accusations began to spread, when suspicion entered the court, that closeness became a liability. Norris was accused of betrayal, tied to the downfall of Anne Boleyn, and ultimately executed. The fall was swift, brutal, and final. Because in a world where power came from proximity, losing the king's trust meant losing everything. And this is where the role becomes something deeper than it first appears. It was not just about access. It was about navigating a relationship that required absolute loyalty while existing in an environment filled with suspicion. The groom had to be careful with every word, every action, every piece of information. One mistake, one misunderstood comment could be enough to end a career or a life. And yet, despite the risks, men continued to pursue this position. They fought for it. They competed for it because the rewards were unmatched. As Henry VIII grew older, his health began to decline. Injuries, illness, and age made him more dependent on those around him, and that only increased the importance of the groom of the stool. When the king could not appear in public as often, when he relied more on his private chambers, the influence of those closest to him grew stronger. Decisions were shaped in smaller rooms, in quieter conversations, in moments that were never recorded. And once again, the groom was there for all of it. What makes this story so compelling is not just the strangeness of the role, but what it reveals about power itself. We often imagine power as something visible, something tied to titles, positions, or authority. But the groom of the stool shows us a different reality. Power can be quiet. It can exist in the background. It can belong to someone who never speaks in public, who never stands in the spotlight, but who is always present at the right moment. Over time, as the structure of monarchy began to change, the role slowly faded. New systems replaced old traditions. Ideas about privacy evolved. The intimate rituals of the royal body became less central to governance, and eventually, the position disappeared altogether. But the underlying principle never truly went away, because even today, the most powerful people in the world still rely on those closest to them. Advisors, assistants, individuals who operate just outside the public eye, but who hold immense influence simply because of their proximity. So when you think about the groom of the stool, it is easy to focus on the surface details, the part that seems unusual or uncomfortable. But beneath that is a story about trust, about access, and about the human side of power. It is a reminder that even the most powerful figures in history were still human, still vulnerable, still in need of someone they could trust in their most private moments. And sometimes, the person who stands closest in those moments holds more power than anyone else in the room. And that raises a question. If you were given the opportunity, would you take a role like this? Would you accept the discomfort, the risk, the constant pressure in exchange for that level of access? Or would the cost be too high? Because history shows us that getting close to power can change everything, but it can also take everything away.